Evening, everyone. My name is Karen Redmond. I'm the Mayor of the town of Gawler. I'd like to welcome everyone here, members of the Community Gallery, speakers, staff, elected members. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the land that we meet on tonight is the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Greater Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. So we have an apology from Councillor David Hughes and Councillor Mick Lorna. I think he's on leave. Is Mick on leave? Yes. If you can just note that. Oh, that's there. Thank you. Everybody else is here. Are there any motions to grant leave of absence, councillors? There be none. Mick Lorna is a leave of absence. There's no non-attendance. I'll get straight into deputations. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people speaking. I'll name them. And then if you come up, if you leave the microphone on, that would be really good. Justin, you're the first person cab off the rank. So Mr. Justin Simmons, Mr. Adam Roberts, Mr. Tony Piccolo, MP, Mr. Chris Vanassis, Managing Director of Future Urban, and Judy Ferguson-Gihar. So Justin, if you'd like to come forward and just pop that microphone on, and if you can leave it on, thank you.
Sure. You ready? Yeah? Okay, cool.
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship, and good evening to you, councillors and the administration staff. I want to express appreciation to the councillors for their unwavering support and commitment to listening to the concerns of our community. Your meaningful dialogue is a testament to the democratic process and the importance of community representation. Tonight, I want to emphasise the significance of Gawler Community Plan 2030+, which was developed in partnership with the community. This plan serves as the compass that guides planning decisions, ensuring that we work towards a cohesive vision for the future of our town. I quote the Mayor in stating that the Community Plan 2030+ is the town of Gawler's highest level strategic document. Those last 4 words, highest level strategic document. Whilst I'm happy to field questions about the survey's validity, the community has emphatically said that through their submissions and through the forum, that they don't see alignment between this development and the 2030+ plan. They spoke to the adverse effects of on our residential areas, the degradation of our town's distinct character, and the disregard for preserving visual amenity. It is abundantly clear that the community does not support this proposal. Council's duty is not to simply tick off technical aspects of the development. The Honourable Nick Champion MP, Minister for Planning, wrote in his letter that through the code amendment process, councils must proactively advocate for their communities. One of the key pillars of our council's work has been the preservation of Gawler's rich historical background. However, I must express my concern that supporting the proposed development undermines our efforts to preserve heritage and charm. Saying yes to this will have long-term consequences and an irreversible impact on the future character and identity of the area. The Gawler Environment and Heritage Association's submission highlights the importance of maintaining the entrance to Old Gawler and opposes any development that compromises its visual appeal and significance. The area is not characterised by large, green, prefabricated concrete buildings, but period homes that hold significance and contribute to the heritage fabric of the town. It's characterised by low density, single-storey housing and a significant urban tree canopy. In considering the impact on residents, I shared with you my visual scan comparing the context of here to Sydney. It's astonishing that only 5 houses in Sydney, a city with 5 million residents and 2 million dwellings, share a fence with a Bunnings store, and there are 43 stores. That's 5 houses, 1 in a million. In contrast, our close-knit town, with approximately 20,000 residents and 10,000 dwellings, faces a unique situation where 16 properties would directly border this development. I find it interesting that whilst it's technically feasible to whack a Bunnings into suburbs of major metropolitan centres, it hasn't been done in Sydney. The addition of another set of traffic lights will have much more broad implications for the entire town. The community has a distaste for more traffic lights, and this is expressed strongly in the community consultation. When you mention it, an ick response, akin to offering Brussels sprouts to a 4-year-old, is almost obligatory. The whole town of Gawler already faces challenges with traffic congestion, and the feedback received from the community demonstrates resounding opposition to any augmentation of this issue. The road network is on a knife's edge through Adelaide Road and Murray Street. And whilst Berry has the Big Orange and Kingston has the Big Lobster, this section of road is home to the big KFC queue. Just a few hundred metres up, you get to Murray Street, an arterial road where you get to stop for people parallel parking or making a right turn into Dan Murphy's. We know that a significant rain event eliminates the Fords, and that leads to traffic chaos through this section of road. So in conclusion, I implore you as representatives of our community to consider the critical points raised today and through the consultation period. Your role extends beyond mere technicalities. It encompasses the responsibility of advocating for the best interests of our community and preserving the unique character that makes Gawler a cherished place to call home. Let us stand united in our commitment to uphold the values enshrined in the Gawler 2030 Plus plan and ensure that our decisions align with the long-term vision of our town. Thank you.
Thank you. Adam Roberts.
Good evening, Your Worship, councillors and staff. I'd like to start off by echoing Justin's sentiments in our appreciation of you listening to the concerns of our community. This has been an exhausting experience for many people, and I, for one, am glad it's coming to a conclusion. I understand that most of you have probably made up your mind on where you'll vote tonight in regards to endorsing this code amendment or not. But Justin and I are here as members of the community asking you, our elected councillors, to not just listen, but to also hear our concerns of this contentious code amendment one last time before making your final decision. A decision, I might add, that may have significant negative impact to the town of Gawler into the future. From the onset, we as a community have been steadfast in the opinion that this is the wrong area for a code amendment from residential to employment. We have not wavered in that opinion, and we are all here again to reaffirm you this tonight. We have heard multiple times in council meetings and read in the council's draft submission in support of the code amendment that you'll be voting on later tonight, that this code amendment has merit and is technically sound. I'm not here to argue that point, but I personally believe that a code amendment of this nature should have overwhelming evidence in support of that so-called merit. This proposed code amendment does not. One of the major benefits that the proponents and Future Urban have highlighted from the start, and they may even bring it up again tonight, is more jobs for Gawler. Page 22 of the draft submission bluntly points out that Future Urban have not separated new jobs from relocated jobs. And in fact, the net increase of jobs, if any, is yet to be determined. I'd ask all of you to please carefully consider whether you are willing to support this code amendment, knowing full well that you aren't voting for any guaranteed new jobs for Gawler. I'm sure if there's one thing we can all agree on, is that Gawler is a beautiful town, steeped in history. Many people envy us for living in Gawler with its country town charm and by extension, its iconic gateway. I'd like to read what the Gawler and Barossa Jockey Club say on their website. And I quote, "The Gawler and Barossa Jockey Club is one of the first landmarks you see driving to town. With its picturesque rose gardens, lush green lawns, and impressive new function centre, the Terrace. The draft submission simply states, the affected area is not a gateway. The affected area is not a gateway. First landmark, picturesque rose gardens, lush green lawns. That sounds like a pretty nice gateway into town to me. A gateway that should be respected and protected and not marred by an imposing 10.5 metre high homemaker centre. I'd like to also point out that Gawler and Barossa Jockey Club are against this code amendment, making the comments, the code amendment has no positive impact on the workings of our club and could also restrict the operating functions, as detailed in their submission to Gawler Council during your recent community engagement. Just as Justin once again highlighted the significance of the Gawler Community Plan 2030 plus and how it serves as the compass that guides planning decisions. I'll ask each and every one of you to use that same community plan as your compass tonight as to whether this proposed rezoning is fitting with it or not. Thank you once again for your time tonight. Sorry, for not only your time tonight, but for every occasion I presented a deputation to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. I just want to, council members under legislation have to come with an open mind to every single meeting. I just thought I'd remind people of that because I think you said that some people had already made up their mind. I hope that's not the case. They need to listen to the debate and have an open mind. Thank you. So now I'll call Tony Piccolo MP up. Thank you.
Good evening, Your Worship, councillors and staff. Thank you for the opportunity to address you tonight on the proposed code amendment for Everston Park. And thank you for engaging with the community in a meaningful manner. The decision you need to make tonight is simultaneously both difficult and simple. Difficult because the proponents for the proposal assert that it will attract both investment and employment to the area. Without judging such assertion, it is an important consideration, and so the proposal may warrant council support. Equally though, the decision is simple because the proposal is inconsistent with Council's Community Plan 2030 plus. Council's Community Plan is the key strategic document and social contract with the Gawler community. It outlines Council's values and its vision for the future of our community. Based on the Community Plan, Council's decision tonight should not support the proposed code amendment. So how can Council navigate these two polar views and reach the correct decision? Your Worship, councillors. When I first entered local government at the District Council Manapara back in 1981, I vividly recall being advised by one of the more experienced councillors that planning has two key elements to it. The first element is the law. These are the acts, regulations and policies that provide the framework for our planning system. That is, all planning decisions have to have regard for the law at the time the decision has been made. The second element is the future. This element involves reflection and judgment, requiring decision maker to think about the future of their community. This involves having regard for the historical, present and future character of their community. Your decision tonight can have significant impact on the future character of both the Everston Park community and the town as a whole. And while communities should not live in the past or be held back by the present, they should have a respectful consideration of both. The character of a community is more than the bricks and mortar we observe every day. Its parks and gardens, the community facilities, the businesses and other economic activities. It is all these things and more. It includes all the intangibles that collectively help create a place where people want to live and have a sense of belonging. It is a reflection of their values and beliefs. These elements are reflected in Council's Community Plan 2030, and that is why it's such an important document. The proponents have and will argue that the investment in the code amendment will attract outweighs any negative elements of the proposal. I disagree. Investment is inherently neither good nor bad. It is good when it's the right type of investment in the right place. Yes, this investment would likely lead to some growth in employment. But this investment in another location in the council area would also create employment. And yes, alternative investment opportunities should be explored by the council in consultation with the community. So the question the council needs to ask itself tonight is not whether this proposal meets the technical requirements of the law, because I'm sure it does, but any round object can be fitted into a square hole with sufficient force. But what damage does that force cause? When you consider the significant negative impact the code amendment will have on traffic flows along Main North Road, the amenity and well-being of residents adjacent in the locality, the character of the area as you enter the historic core of the town, the viability of the Gawler Racecourse, and the future character of the town as a whole, it is no accident that the community of Gawler overwhelmingly do not support the code amendment. Your worship, councillors, your community plan represents council's current vision and your view of the future of the Gawler community. The proposed code amendment is not consistent with the community plan and accordingly should not be supported by the council. Thank you for listening.
Mr. Chris Vanassis. Thank you, Chris.
Your worship, councillors and administration, thank you once again for this final opportunity to address council about this code amendment. The project represents around 2 years of collaboration with Gawler Council and the community. From the outset, I'd just like to say that the extent of consultation and investigations undertaken have been the most extensive for rezoning that I've experienced in my career. Notwithstanding whether or not the council was required to undertake a further round of consultation, the proponent did not dispute the council's desire to consult again. Rather, embraced the additional consultation, a process which actually verified that the proponent's own consultation process was appropriate. No new issues were identified as part of that process. However, the proponent made additional positive and improved outcomes. We acknowledge that purely based on a community feedback perspective, the majority of submissions do not support the code amendment. However, from a technical perspective, and in this I include the proponent's experts, the council's technical staff, independent consultants engaged by the council to verify all investigations, and all relevant government agencies, all issues have been appropriately addressed. No contrary expert evidence has been put forward in any submission. However, interestingly, through council's own survey, 50% of the respondents indicate support for the LMA, which is the tool being used to address issues raised in the submissions. This is critically important and goes to the core of the appropriateness or otherwise of this code amendment. Why it's important? It's important because the issues raised by the community need to be assessed through the lens of those investigations where relevant. The challenge for you as an elected body is to separate the element of emotion when undertaking this assessment. I'm not suggesting that emotion be totally ignored. However, it would be irresponsible and contrary to the public interest for emotive views not to be assessed in regard to expert detailed investigations that have been independently verified by council and the relevant preeminent state government authorities. The detailed administration report you have before you undertakes a detailed and balanced assessment and concludes that the code amendment and LMA be supported. I've listened with interest to the comments made by the submitters in regard to the community plan. Now, the reality of this plan is that it's not the guide for strategic planning at all. The 30-year plan is. The role of the 30-year plan is to guide strategic planning. Council must weigh up all of its plans, not just one plan, all of its plans. The reality is that particular plan contains very few policies in regard to economic development. While there are some policies relating to commercial land and job opportunities, it does not identify how that's to be achieved. In relation to growth, the plan largely focuses on social infrastructure, character connections, and tourism. However, a community must have business and must have employment opportunities to support its population and support those objectives of the community plan. With a further 10,000 homes planned at Concordia, the need to provide employment land within the township is of paramount importance to provide additional employment opportunities. And on this point, the independent economic investigations that have been undertaken by council and its own independent consultant have verified that the employment zone has no significant impact on the future residential land supply. Secondly, it verifies that there is actually a lack of employment land that is zoned. And lastly, the shortfall may even be stronger than what's actually indicated by the proponent's own expert. This code amendment, if approved, would simply maintain a commercial presence on this land, on a commercial corridor
30
in
seconds.
May North Road to provide employment zone land. The LMA provides greater certainty for the community with respect to land use, design, interface treatments and infrastructure, which are not applied to the existing commercial operation or the current zone. And for these reasons, the amendment and LMA should be supported. The proponents have demonstrated all perceived impacts can be appropriately managed whilst providing significant community benefit with respect to traffic, stormwater and flooding infrastructure that amounts to a financial contribution of over $750,000. I'll leave it as that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris Vanassis. Judy Gillett Ferguson, please, representing GEHA.
Those that aren't familiar, that's the Gawler Environment and Heritage Association. Good evening, Mayor Redmond, Henry Inat, councillors and staff. This is a Gawler Environment and Heritage Association submission, which they have been in existence for over 40 years, and they have asked me to present to you this evening. So thank you on behalf of our organisation for the opportunity to do this. Gawler Environment and Heritage Association has made written and verbal submissions setting out the broad planning issues, which in the opinion of our association, make this code amendment inconsistent with good planning outcomes for our town. Tonight, we direct our comments to the letter drafted by council staff, forming the basis of a submission by council appearing in Appendix 6, pages 280 to 282 of the agenda document. Special council meeting, the 12th of July, tonight, item 6.1, attachment 6, and as I've said, page 280 to 283. And the reference is CR 23/47756. I quote, Mr. Michael Osborne, Future Urban, Director, Future Urban. Dear Mr. Osborne, Ray the Town of Gawler submission, 550 to 554, May North Road, Evanston Park, Code Amendment. As you are aware, the council previously provided a submission on the 2nd of May to Future Urban on behalf of the designated entity.
We've got that letter here.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. So I'll now give you the
Yes.
GEHA
Okay, thank you.
reference to that. It is council's view. We should suggest that entrance to Gawler would be better expressed as the main southern entrance to the historic area of Gawler, as expressed in early planning of the town by William Light in 1839 and subsequent Gawler South subdivision in 1858, related to the establishment of the train station in Gawler in 1857 and industrial development, which drove the housing and commercial development of Gawler South. The merits of the code amendment and support for the land management agreement. Firstly, the merits. The merits of the proposal in part rest on the interpretation of Planning Development and Infrastructure Act 2016 and the Planning and Design Code. In this context, the code amendment can be supported. However, the code amendment is at variance with the Gawler Community Plan 2030 plus, and therefore the community vision for the town of Gawler. The areas of inconsistency centre around two pillars of this community plan, and which were referenced in the written submissions and relate to the goals 1 and 2. We do not agree that the code amendment can be supported in the context suggested. The code amendment can be seen as satisfying a number of technical matters, certainly under the code. However, we think it fails to answer the question fundamental to any rezoning. Is this an appropriate change to zoning for Gawler? That is the bigger picture of planning for the future of Gawler. In our view, this code amendment introduces a thoroughly inappropriate type of big commercial scale and visually impacting development into a locality that has an existing scale and character of development that is small scale. It's residential and, importantly, open space associated with the racecourse, as a previous speaker has alluded to, all combining to create an entrance and exit from the historic core of Gawler that should be maintained and protected. We note that no response is included in reports to the council to our concern about the visual impact of the proposed large building to vistas towards the foothills, the hills face zone from the Gawler racecourse. Goal 1, a uniquely identifiable township. Many of the submissions made reference to Sheriff Street being the historical southern boundary of the Gawler South Council.
30 seconds, thanks. Judy.
1899. All right, I'll just finish off by saying we broadly agree with the wording of that, except to suggest that the reference to Gawler South Council needs to be rewritten to cover the original Gawler Special Survey. And finally, I will just add, in relation to a future employment zone in the council area, we would suggest including a statement in the submission that council recognises the ongoing need to have opportunities available for employment land to be available and will actively dealing with opportunities that can be promoted. In particular, we would point to larger new development areas such as Springwood and near Tamlin that have not yet been developed where opportunities could be available, but we are not necessarily suggesting this detail be included. So thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Judy. That concludes the deputations. Thank you everyone for agreeing to speak tonight. Are there any declarations of interest, councillors? Are there any declarations of interest, councillors? There be none. I would now ask Mr. Andrew Goodsell and Chris Hannaford to provide a presentation. Thank you. You going up there? Going up there? Yep. Yep.
Thank you, councillors, members of the public. I will keep this hopefully relatively concise. So there'll be, if you like, a presentation from myself in regards to the substantial part of this presentation, but there will also be a component in regards to the analysis on community engagement, which Chris Hannaford, sitting next to me, will speak to. So I'll do a bit of tagging with the controller. In terms of the format of the presentation, I'll take you through the following components. Effectively, we need to talk about, I guess, the role of the planner and their need to weigh up evidence, which I think sometimes can get lost in the debate. The engagement report, which I've already flagged, will be discussed primarily by Chris Hannaford. The technical assessment and merits analysis that we have talked about in our agenda report, but is also touched upon with this presentation. The land management agreement, overview of issues and summary. It's fair to say that sometimes people ask, what do planners do? My wife has asked me that occasionally as well, and I've been married for 30 years. But effectively, the answer to the question is we have to weigh up opposing arguments. In this case, there are clearly different perspectives. We have what I would call broad knowledge, technical skills. We know what we know, we know what we don't know. So in regards to what we know, we have technical reports, we have strategies, we understand broadly how legislation operates and how the court system works. We understand how referrals work and their role in terms of agencies telling us how they will make decisions, including the Department of Transport. We also know when to get advice from others, including civil engineers, because planners usually are not engineers. Against this, we also need to explore what we don't know, as I've said, and then we get peer reviews of technical assessments. And we often do things such as modelling, as we've done in this case. And then we obtain community input. And we focus on fresh information. We look for the data and the feedback we can provide that helps us decide whether we've missed anything, whether the information gives us a clear position to take. And ultimately, we form a position and we report to your good selves. I will now hand over broadly to Chris to discuss the discussion paper. Sorry, the engagement.
Okay, thank you, Andrew, councillors, mayor, and the community. I just want to talk about the engagement report. We did a very extensive community engagement over 3 weeks. We put out 1,400 letters, 23 social posts, and they were all linked to an online survey, which was one of our main communication and feedback channels. We also received submissions. We had 2 drop-in sessions and a community forum, which was held just here 3 weeks ago. We also wanted to make sure the submissions and surveys were valid. And we found that 25 surveys were way out of our primary and secondary trade area from places of like Unley and Myrtle Bank. So they were discounted. We ended up with 276 valid surveys counted. And both in the letter and the surveys that went out, we asked 2 clear questions. Do you support the rezoning from residential to employment? And do you support the land management agreement? And the land management agreement, I'll just briefly go through. We had stormwater upgrade requirements. We had in the land management agreement restriction on pylon signs. We introduced a landscape buffer in consultation, obviously, with the proponents, tree planting in the buffer, traffic modifications, building height reduction now from 13 to 10.5 metres, acoustic treatment, particularly to loading bays, tree retention, saving 8 trees, and also upgrade of Sheriff Street and restriction of industrial uses. So the LMA starts to play a very important role in this project of both being a funding mechanism and a planning instrument. And we also were able to seek around $750,000. The actual survey response, the online survey, produced some very interesting results, with about 1/3 of people actually supporting the zone change and 2/3 against. But when it came to the LMA, it was split 50-50. It showed quite a sophisticated understanding in the community of the role of the LMA. So 50-50 support. And in the online survey, we actually had support for some of those initiatives that we've talked about insofar as increased landscaping, tree preservation, noise control, reduction in heights of the building, flood mitigation, and restricting land uses. So there was strong support for those elements of the LMA in the online survey, but there was opposition to traffic management, particularly the signalised intersection, but it was more 50-50, 47% versus 53%. But the street closure on First and Sheriff Street, or the street treatment there, was not supported. And then we had a range of views in an open question, in question 12, and all of those responses are on page 55 of the council report, which you can have a look at. And then the written submissions were actually quite different. We had 78 written submissions, and the majority of those were from members of the local community, and none were in support of the code amendment. And we also had one from GIHA, which was not in support of the code amendment, and one from PLUS, which is the old department. And all of those submissions are on page 75 and full submissions on page 78. And they raise those issues that we have talked about of traffic congestion, rezoning not warranted, concern about gateway and character, rat running, building height, etc. And you won't be able to see that, but it's in the council reports. That shows the issues raised, and the principal issue is traffic congestion, and many people raised up to 10 issues. Now, there was a discrepancy between the online and the written submissions, which we will get to, but at the end of the day, there was strong opposition to the proposed rezoning, and the GIHA submission detailed its concern about the community plan not being fully addressed through this proposal, and also challenged the concept of the need for additional employment land. So just move on to what is an interesting outcome. With the written submissions, 78 written submissions, none being in support, we had 276 online surveys, which was essentially 2/3 opposed and 1/3 in support, and 50-50 with the LMA. So we've got two very different results. We looked at, is that explained by geography and location of the actual survey responses? We couldn't get a definitive answer from that. But what we could suggest is that those who are against rezoning were highly motivated. They put in the extra effort to write a submission. So that's where we got those submissions from. We could also say that those who had a level of support for it were more inclined to provide a simpler response via the online survey. So, and they may have enjoyed a level of anonymity there by not actually sort of putting their name into a full submission. Nevertheless, that whole exercise, we did extensive engagement, and we've got the community views very well recorded. So I'll hand over to you, Andrew. Thank you.
As I foreshadowed earlier, we've done a number of what we call technical assessments, looking at code provisions and how we thought the development may or may not impact the surrounding area. Certainly interface issues, got a pretty good Guernsey from various submitters. So we've done a few things. So firstly, we looked at a section profile analysis. And if you recall, back in the day, Future Urban did an earlier version based on a different building height when it was higher. We've also looked at deemed to satisfy provisions, there are provisions in the code that deal with interface issues between non-residential and residential uses for those who are interested. And there are provisions both under 3.1, 3.2, but also if the land were to be zoned employment, there are specific provisions there as well. So what we did was and it's also covered in the report, we modelled the development based on the concept plan showing the setbacks using the same sight lines as have been shown before. On the right-hand side, you can see a hypothetical 2-storey unit development that would be enabled or allowable under the existing zone provisions, and actually the height we modelled was slightly less than it's allowed under the zone. So we use that just for some context in terms of the impact you would have without even rezoning land in terms of visual impact, shadowing and the like, just as some context. Effectively, what we basically show on the left-hand side is that of the 4 properties previously profiled and reprofiled again here, 2 of the properties effectively would not see the wall of the model development or be hitting the absolute top edge of it. So effectively negligible impact, we would argue. The other 2 properties would have a view of exposed walls, roughly about 1/3 of the wall height. So there is a visual impact in that sense. The question is always one of context and whether that's acceptable or otherwise. On the right-hand side, under all scenarios, residential development would be visible because of the nature of development whereby council couldn't compel a developer to put trees in rear courtyards, for example. That setback is what the zone allows for. That height is what the zone allows for. Of course, unit development is different in the sense that it would not be a single box, but there again, under the code amendment, it's not to be said that necessarily you get a single box in terms of a homemaker centre. They can be articulated and dealt with in different ways. But the development on the right is just to show some context that development with existing zoning could have an impact. What we did at a council level, at administrative level, was model shadow impacts. We did that on 21st of June, as is required. The conclusion we had was that perhaps to a degree, the impacts modelled by Future Urban at 9 AM on Ames Drive were somewhat overstated. They had shadows going all the way out to Ames Drive. We felt it was somewhat less, but different models give different results sometimes. So that's not necessarily absolutely critical. But those models did marry up pretty well for 12 PM and 3 PM. So what that effectively showed was that the code provisions in terms of shadowing impacts on Coleman Parade were acceptable, met accepted standards under the code, that the impacts on Ames being a south side facing property, set of properties would need to be carefully managed, but would meet the code, but probably should be dealt with in additional detail as part of any DA that were to be arrived at, which also was a conclusion from Future Urban. Moving forward, and that was our assessment at the time. It's in the report, so I won't go into detail. The other part of our assessment was looking at what the impacts would be if you were to have an employment zone and how the interface provisions work in that context. So what that basically says is that in Coleman Parade's case, not being a south-facing relationship to the proposed land, the setback requires in the order of 7.5 metres. So what's provided at the moment is 9. And that's how the code operates. When it comes to Ames Drive, the setback is larger because the angle is different. It goes from 45 to 30 degrees, and therefore the setback's recommended to be something closer to 13 metres, not 9. What happens in that situation is if you don't meet the numerical standard, you have to meet the performance standard. So without getting into a whole lot of planning speak, because you've got better things to do, the short version of that is if you don't meet the numerical standard, you have to address the performance outcome, which is my previous modelling I provided to you, which means you could meet the shadow projections as previously said. And I won't read that because I just said it. Overview of issues. So there are 5 issues effectively we need to talk about. First is the need for employment zone land. The second is the locational suitability of the affected area for employment zone land. Third is the likely modelled impacts of development. Noting this is, of course, not a DA at the moment. Community opinion related to the above matters and agency feedback. In what I would call absolute terms, the strongest aspect of the proposed development is probably in regards to employment zone land. There is a shortage. That's demonstrated not just in the work that's been done by the proponent, but also the peer review that was done by Alinea Group. For those who don't know, Alinea Group is doing work for council at the moment on a range of matters to do with commercial and retail development, and they did a peer review of the Ethos Urban work. As has been said as well, if anything, the demand has been undercooked, and the demand is probably larger than what is specified in the Ethos Urban analysis. We'll touch back on that again in 23-24 as we do the Gawler 2046 growth framework. Locational suitability. There are effectively 2 questions that come out of locational suitability. The first is whether there are suitable sites within the town of Gawler already zoned that could be used instead of the affected area. And secondly, if new land was required, is the affected area a likely appropriate candidate? And for those who recall the previous report I did, we did address this issue in some detail. We talked about land that was existing zoned. We talked about land that wasn't zoned and whether it could meet the general locational requirements. So in regards to question A, the answer is no. There is no existing zoned employment land that meets the requirements for what is proposed, but also what is the current shortfall based on a 15-year supply. There is not a huge amount of debate about that. Second question is about whether or not if affected area is a suitable candidate? And again, the answer is yes. Notwithstanding, there are a range of views in this room, which I respect. This was also covered in a previous report. At the community forum in June 2023, a number of alternative sites were suggested. In fact, there was another one tonight as well. So Concordia, Murray Street, Gawler Park, Springwood, and there's a reason why none of those are appropriate. Gawler Park, as previously discussed, is zoned for employment. That's held under at least 5 to 10 different ownerships. It's fully developed, fragmented, and therefore not suitable. Having vacant land does not denote that it's a suitable site. And I noticed when council adopted its 2014 to 18 vision or strategic framework at the time, it was largely occupied. So occupancy varies over time. There's not a criteria for saying it's an appropriate site for a greenfield development. Other sites have greater constraints. It would be a horrifying suggestion to say that because there's a vacant sites in Murray Street, that it should be a bulky goods or homemaker centre. So I think we'll put that to one side. Spring was neither locationally appropriate or with sufficient commercial land. It's not consistent with the master plan. Concordia is still going through a full master planning exercise, but a homemaker centre is entirely unlikely. So given the history of the affected area, its commercial character and the surrounding context within 400 metres, it is broadly acceptable for the use intended. Now, let me go to model impacts, which I've already discussed, so I'm not going to go through that again. In regards to community opinion, slides 4 to 12, I think Chris has well and truly answered that. So again, I don't think I'll repeat that. And then we get to agency feedback. So the key agency in this respect, given that traffic and transport was the #1 single largest issue, is whether or not DIT, as the road authority, the agency that will make the final decision as to whether or not impacts are acceptable on a road they manage and maintain. And the answer from DIT is that they accept that the development could proceed, that the land could be rezoned, and that they could, through conditions of approval, proceed with development on the site. And whilst I win no popularity in this room, that has weight. Ultimately, in summary, council are a referral authority for this code amendment. We're being asked to provide a planning response and submission. Notwithstanding, council has taken a significant amount of community engagement. We've done something in the order of 5 peer reviews. We've spent a lot of time working on LMAs and progressively sought to not only increase setbacks, but address tree management, acoustics, and at least 2 to 3 different revisions of the building height. We also accept, however, that the majority of submitters, often a lot of those in this room, don't support the code amendment on merit, so we call that as it is. Weighing up the strengths of submissions and the evidence provided, the recommendation is to support the code amendment, endorse the supporting its submission and LMA. Should this position not be supported, council should nonetheless support the LMA to protect council and the community's interest with respect to infrastructure delivery and funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew and Chris. That concludes the presentation. I'll allow Andrew to sit down before I take any questions. Thank you. Councillor Solomon, you had your hand up, and I'm on page 4, decision reports.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm seeking to move an alternative motion, which I believe councillors have in front of them at the moment. And that was sent earlier, so I believe it's on the screen.
So that's the second one, Chris? What? Okay, is it the first one or the second one? The first one? Okay.
Yep.
You like to present that, please? Everyone's got a copy of that in front of them, Councillor Solomon, so you can proceed.
I believe was there a small change? No worries. Right, thank you. So I'm moving that motion. I'll speak to the motion now. I'll start with the same sentiment that I finished the last meeting with, which is that we can, but this is really a question of whether we should. The question of whether we can is a question of regulation. It's a question of compliance with the relevant statutes and regulations. But the question of whether we can is the question of merit, is a question of whether we should. The first point of reference for whether we should be our community plan. And I think that's been highlighted tonight. Our community plan is an aspirational document and it demonstrates what to the community what our vision is for the town of Gawler. It represents what our vision should be and how we tell and communicate that to the community. I believe that the code amendment is in conflict with our community plan. It's in conflict with our vision, and it's in conflict with the expectations of the very people that community plan was written for. The code amendment diminishes the community plan, it diminishes our vision for the town, and it diminishes the voices of our community. Diminishes the voices of the very people whose lifestyles, whose quality of life will suffer from having a bulky goods store in their backyard. The residents have come here month after month, and I thank them for being so respectful in the way that they've come. They've spent a lot of time in this fighting something that they didn't expect to have to fight at the beginning, but they've come here respectfully and they've shown that their expectations, we have fallen out of sync with our own community plan and with the expectations of our community. I note that there are some benefits to this in regards to employment. And I think we should acknowledge that there are benefits to the town from having a bulky goods store within our town. Though this isn't going to solve unemployment. It's not going to fix the cost of living. It's not going to employ every person in Gawler. And on the balance of things, it does more harm than it does good. I think it weakens our strong and vibrant community. It jeopardizes the health and well-being of that community. It fails to protect the environment, and it threatens the unique lifestyle in Evanston Park and in our town. I know that this is not our decision to make. It's ultimately the minister's decision, but we do and we can take the responsibility for our role in this process, which is to show our views as representatives of this community. We know we can and we should support the views of our community and be clear that as their elected representatives, we do not support the code amendment. Taking this stance is a bold decision, but so is our vision for this town. I ask my fellow elected members to be bold and to vote for this motion to oppose the code amendment. Thank you.
Please be quiet. We're in the middle of a meeting. Thank you very much. Now, have I a seconder? Councillor Hennessy, you have your hand up. Yes, you could just need to turn it on.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to support my colleague's words. I can only agree with how he's quite eloquently put the various points. I guess from my professional background as well, I'd like to underline the information that GEHA, Gawler Environment and Heritage, has provided as well. This is not just the Gawler South entrance. It's actually, if you understand the uniqueness of our town and it being Colonel Light's plan, this is part of the extension of that as the town then grew into Gawler South as the railway came and everything else. So you are really starting to affect what makes our town unique and special, as well as all the other points. So I'm happy to second the motion.
Councillor Koch.
Thanks, Mayor. I've actually got some questions and I'll speak later. So I'm just going to got some questions and
Your questions
yeah,
are?
okay. It's probably to Mr. Goodsall.
Well, I'll
Through you.
decide
Yep.
who answers the
Okay,
question.
I'm a little bit confused, I suppose, about the report that we've got, which says that the amendment is not in variance, basically, with the community plan. So I really want to get some background on the community plan, what its status is. And the reason why I'm confused is because we have one with report which says it's not that the proposed, on page 21, it says proposed code amendment is not contrary to the Gawler community plan. So it says that, and it lists all the reasons why it isn't. And then we go down to attachment 6 and it says it is contrary. So my concern is that we have one thing in a report from
Yep.
our staff, which is now a public document.
Yes.
And then we're now saying, well, no, we don't accept that. We're going to, we're saying it is contrary. So could I just get some background on that?
Some clarity
Yes,
around that,
yep,
Mr.
yep.
Goodsell. Are you happy to answer those questions? That question?
Thank you through the chair. Certainly the issue of the community plan has been raised, not just through GEHA, but by various other parties during the submission process. It's fair to say, as you pointed out, that we have addressed in a fair degree of detail, I felt, through part 5 or point 5 or heading 5, page 20 of 283. There's at least 2 to 3 pages of analysis of how we think at an administrative level that the code amendment is responsive. I guess my first point would be really that the community plan is not a land use plan, never was, never will be. It could not be used in a tribunal. It could not be used in a merits argument with minister, realistically, for a rezoning. Having said that, we've addressed it. That's how we came to the conclusion that we felt that it was broadly consistent with the broad objectives, because you don't look at things in isolation. You look at the total community plan as what it is. It's a vision document with a whole heap of actions to be delivered, but it is not identifying whether or not a particular DA should be approved or rezoning. Having said all that, we also respect the community position as expressed, which is they believe that the community plan is a land use strategy and that it actually has the weight that we don't believe it has. And therefore the submission which has been provided reflects their position as opposed to ours.
Another question, if you can turn your mic on.
Given what has just been said, it'll go to the minister, however we vote, we'll go with the minister because the minister will decide.
Yes.
How will the technical people in town, the planners that advise the minister, view the community plan after reading this document?
A question around the community and how the department will view the community plan, Mr. Goodsell. Are you able to answer that question?
Through the chair, yeah, I'm happy to attempt to.
Yeah.
I think what will happen is the commission would review council submission along with all the other submissions that come from the community and from Future Urban. They'll weigh it up as they always do. But in practical terms, as I probably said, the community plan is what drives the strategic work that we would do, whether it be southern rural areas or a new urban framework for the CBD or an integrated transport plan. It doesn't get to the level of a rezoning of a parcel of land. So it would be given the weight it probably would be intended to have, the way the Local Government Act is constructed, which is it's a broad vision. It's not a site-specific vision. And I guess they'll weigh it up and they'll make their own determination. We're not the minister, we're not the commission, so they may give it more weight than I do.
Another question? Yes, certainly.
With the presentation we just had, we looked at the appropriateness of that site. In particular, we talked about employment and that was okay.
Yes.
From a planning principle point of view, have we actually looked at the bulk, scale and size of that development in context with the surrounding neighbourhood and the commercial activities along Adelaide Road? Because in my opinion, it seems out of whack. I just want to know whether whether council's actually looked at that.
Do you understand the question? Are you able to answer that question, Mr. Goodsell?
Through the chair. Yes, we've looked at existing homemaker centres such as the one within Gawler Green, for example, in terms of its building height. It's about 8.5, 9 metres. Is this taller? Yes, it is. It's about 1.5 metres taller. Are there other buildings as tall as what's proposed? Not immediately surrounding it, no. As for the issue, which I think you're getting at, which is about gateways, well, but maybe you're not, but we'll deal with that later. But certainly in terms of building heights, we've looked at other buildings in the area. I've actually looked at the height of any buildings within the racecourse, for example. That's probably something I could have looked at, but didn't.
Any other discussion? Councillor Davies?
Yeah, so well, firstly, thanks to everyone who's gotten involved. I think this has really been a good process and a great community engagement process. So thanks to the staff on that front. I think Chris Hannaford's presentation earlier did show the level of nuance in the responses. It's not just a matter of some people say yes and some people say no. The people can support the can oppose the proposal and support the LMA, or they can support specific aspects of the LMA and not others. And I think that goes to show that this is something that people have thought deeply about and are making nuanced responses. It's not just a matter of, oh, I don't want that, I'll just say no to everything. It has been a really good process there. So yeah, on this topic of whether it aligns with our visions, I just came out from a different meeting. I'm on the board of the Gawler Community House, and that meeting wrapped up at 6:30, and I wandered up to hear from my meeting at 7. So, but we were discussing there some history with grants that ended up looking good, but weren't necessarily aligned with the values, or well, not the values, the ambitions of where the organisation wanted to go. There was one, for example, for expanding classes, which the community house does classes for, you know, teaching people to use computers and that kind of thing. But it ended up not quite aligning, because what the government wanted out of the grant was sort of more employment, you know, getting employment and that sort of thing. And that wasn't the area that the community house was focusing in. And there was another example of a grant where a hub in Freeling was made for the community house. And, you know, and that didn't work out either. And they sort of just had to return the remainder of the money when it closed up and didn't finish. And that was, you know, and that was a case where it was free money. And so you can see why you would, you know, if someone says, oh, it's a grant, there's no strings attached, you already meet all the requirements, you know, to do more of what you want to do. There's a value in that. But what we found was that when it didn't align with our actual ambition as a community house, in that case, it ended up having some problems, even though it aligned on a technical level and it was, you know, giving us some money. So I think I see that as a parallel to the Gawler Council and the community plan. You know, the question is, do our decisions align with our ambitions as a community? You know, as Andrew Goodsell said, the community plan is not a planning document on that technical level. It's our vision for Gawler. You know, and so we're looking at this as at a broader level of, is this in 30 years, will we look back on that in 30 years and be proud that that's there? Or is it just something that in the short term, we get some short-term value out of, but it's an issue for our long-term vision? And so that's where I'm inclined to support Councillor Solomon's motion here. And yeah, I'm not making this decision on emotion or just because a lot of community members have shown up. If I was sold on the long-term benefits, you know, I would, you know, have to vote against what the community wanted sometimes. And that's what our role is as a council, is we weigh out the different decisions and the different advice. And of course, you know, we try and find compromises, but here I just legitimately think that in a long-term vision for Gawler, I'm not sold on this development. So that's why I'll support this motion.
Any other discussion? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, firstly, I'd like to start by making it clear that I'm pro-development. It keeps me employed every single day. As an elected member, I've had to have that battle internally of what I'm passionate about, what I do for a living, and then also put on my councillor hat. This one for me has been a little bit easier, if I'm being honest, because on a growth and sustainable development level, I always ask the question of, if I was to zone from scratch, would I choose this particular area to be a bulky goods outlet. And hand on heart, I arrive at a no, purely because of the surrounding areas, the hill facings, everything that has been itemised here for us tonight through our community members who we thank for their voice. And I don't feel that this is what we could sacrifice here in solving one problem and what we could potentially cause on another level. You know, Councillor Davies touched on, will we look back at this decision if we were to say yes? And I think the answer there is we'd go, that didn't work out quite how we were hoping to. The processes that have been followed, I don't disagree with the sentiment from the proponents. I don't disagree with the sentiment from the staff in relation to the appropriate rules, the appropriate guidelines being followed. And we're now a part of those appropriate guidelines. It is now our opportunity to give our opinions as an elected member, as a ratepayer in our town. And the question of could has been professionally answered, and we thank staff for that. We also thank the proponents' process for that, because I don't disagree on a technical level if it could go in there. But the process now allows us to provide our feedback on whether we believe it should. And unfortunately, I haven't got a strong enough argument to say, yes, I believe it should, because if I did have a strong enough argument, the sentiment, although I love my community and represent my community, it can't be swayed by the immediate impact on direct neighbours as a totality. We need to balance. However, the argument needs to be strong if we want to choose to ignore. And the argument is not strong enough to be able to ignore the voice and the problems that have, in my opinion, not been addressed to the level they need to be for something we need to deal with in the future, potentially. So for that reason, I was supporting the motion the way that it sits, and business-wise, we do need to support the land management agreement, because as discussed, we are not the approving body here. We are merely one of the stakeholders that is to give our opinion. And tonight we have finally been able to give that. So again, I thank everyone involved with the process. Some are going to agree with my opinion that I've now put forward, and some are going to disagree, but that's democracy. This is why we sit here, to follow these processes and voice our opinions for one reason or another. So again, I thank Councillor Solomon for moving the motion, and it will have my support.
Any other discussion? Councillor Kosh.
Look, thanks, Mayor. This is a difficult decision. And a lot of these, with the new code, a lot of these decisions are taken out of our hand, because it's now the government, because it's gone through the system. The community has little input, really. We're just a referring agent. Before we would have had much more say in it. So that's just the first thing I want to say.
The community has been taken out of the process.
Yeah, basically, the community is taken out of it. I mean, my view is I don't support this amendment, this code amendment, and that's the first time I've stated that publicly. And the main reason is that I don't think the bulk and scale and size of this development is appropriate for that site. That's my view. There is commercial activities on Adelaide Road. They tend to be smaller, they're compatible with the surrounding neighbourhood, and they work harmoniously. I don't think this, the size, scale, bulk, it will work harmoniously with the surrounding community and Gawler in particular. That's my view. The issue I do have is with the motion, and I'm not sure whether I can support the motion, is it actually predicates itself on saying that the amendment is in variance to our development, our community plan. I don't think it is. We've got enough evidence in the reports from experts to say that the code amendment is actually compatible with our community plan. So unfortunately, I think that's been a bit of a red herring that people have gone off and used that community plan as the reason behind not supporting it. I think we should be actually saying that we've looked at the planning principles and the planning principle around citing developments that are compatible and work harmoniously with the existing neighbourhood and the community. That's the view that we should be having, not saying that it's in variance, because if this gets up, when it goes to be viewed by the people that are providing information and reports to the minister, they're going to say, well, here's the report from council, here's the motion, one cancels out the other. And it does look a bit, it's a bit contrary and looks a bit odd that a council would, have expert advice saying one thing and then vote completely the opposite, when the document itself was never a strategic document. It never was. It was provide some principles, some guiding principles. That's what it is. So I think people have elevated it to a too high a level, and now we could be tripping ourselves over. I think we really should be saying that it doesn't match good planning principles. That's what we should be doing. And that's my view. So I'm not sure whether I'll vote for this. I probably won't, because I think that this will trip us up. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Councillor Solomon, you can wrap up the debate.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just make a couple of quick points. I think the reason for the drafting of this motion is that it looks to support the LMA, which I think is an important part in there, and that's specifically been referenced. I don't think that's in dispute, and I agree with what's been said by staff about that. I think it makes it more concise than it was, and I think there's value in including that community feedback in that submission there. I would just point quickly to page 280, that attachment 6. It does say in there under point 1 that the code amendment is at variance with the Gawler Community Plan. That's the wording which has been put in by our expert staff. And so I trust that they wouldn't be putting us in a position where that is not, that's not consistent with regulation and not consistent with their expert advice. So that's the reason that it's in the motion. And that's the reason that I think that elected members should vote for this and vote for that wording. I don't think anyone is suggesting that the community plan is a veto document, but what it is a overview of our vision for the town. Our role is not to make a decision on the code amendment. It never has been. That's up to the minister and the department. Our role is simply to provide guidance on what we believe our community thinks, and that's exactly what we're doing tonight. So I think that this motion covers the sentiment of the chamber here tonight. It has been, and I will say, I just want to acknowledge that I thank everyone. I thank the representatives of the proponent for coming out. While I don't agree, I respect that you've come to do your job, and I respect staff who provided advice. I respect the Bunyip for their coverage, and I respect the community for all the input. And I respect the chamber for having, come to where we are tonight in this process. So with that, it is a difficult decision, but we know what our role is, and I think it's time we fulfilled that role.
The debate is closed. I'm going to put that motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands. All those against? It is carried. Thank you. So now I will close the meeting at 8. Sorry. I didn't hear the division. Who called the division? Oh, you did? Okay. Okay, so Councillor Solomon has called a division. All those in favour, please stand. And I'll call your names out. All those in favour, Councillor White, Councillor Davies, Deputy Mayor Shanks, Councillor Solomon and Councillor Hennessy. All those against are Councillor Kosh, Councillor Vallelonga and Councillor Samball. The motion is carried. Thank you. I will now close the meeting at 8:14. Thank you.